are involved in the rally held yearly on the International Day Against Racism and Discrimination. The UN established this day in the 1960s after a massacre in Sharpeville committed by South Africa's apartheid regime. Organizers say with the far right gaining strength in many parts of Europe, including the Netherlands, remembering the dangers of racism remains both important and relevant.
We want to show with this protest that the Netherlands will remain a democracy which upholds the rule of law. We will not tolerate their discriminatory and divisive politics. We demand that the government resigns.
Refugees are welcome here.
Some say the government's anti-immigration policies have a large impact on their lives.
I worry a lot about it for the undocumented people. I worry a lot about it every day because I'm also undocumented. The government also, I can feel it also, like they kind of make a lot of differences for us, but we are not different, we are all the same.
A shared concern and sense of urgency has brought thousands of people onto the streets here in Amsterdam. This large turnout shows not only how many people are worried about the future of the Palestinian people, but also about the erosion of the rule of law and about racist politics in their own country.
Protests also took place in France. Thousands marched through Paris and Marseille, showing concern about the rise of the far right and Israel's ongoing attacks on Gaza. Step Fasten, Al Jazeera, Amsterdam.
Well, demonstrators have also been protesting in San Sebastian in northern Spain against Israel's renewed assault on Gaza. They marched through the streets holding banners which called for an immediate end to the war. Follow similar protests across other European cities over recent days, pledging solidarity with the Palestinians in Gaza. The China Development Forum is underway in Beijing, with global corporate leaders meeting top policymakers. The Chinese premier says Beijing will pursue what he describes as the correct path of globalization.
As a responsible major country, China will firmly stand on the correct side of the history, that of fairness and justice, and act in a righteous manner amid the rough waters of the times, adhere to the correct direction of the economic globalization, practice true multilateralism, and strive to be a force of stability and certainty in the cause of global peace and development.
Katrina Yu has more from Beijing.
Chinese Premier Li Qiang was addressing a room full of top global executives from companies that are really household names: Apple, Samsung, Estee Lauder, IKEA. Now, these leaders will be meeting over the next 2 days with other top economists and leaders from financial institutions around the world. Li Qiang really had 3 messages for the audience. And the first is that China is open for business. While other countries may be imposing protectionist policies, China will continue to open up, and it has done so by opening up some more industries to foreign investment, including health and education. He also said that China is committed to continuing to try to level the playing field for foreign businesses. The second message was that China is serious about stimulating growth and stimulating consumption. We do know that the Chinese economy has really struggled to recover following the end of the COVID-19 pandemic. He said that China was shifting gears this year, changing from a rather prudent fiscal policy to a proactive one, and that will really invest in creating a vibrant market economy, especially in the sectors of green energy and science and technology. And the third message was that China is prepared for bigger than expected external shocks. Now, this is no doubt referring to the Trump administration, which has threatened extra tariffs on China. It's already imposed 20% tariffs since the beginning of Trump's second term. He's really trying to reassure international business that it is safe, that it is secure to invest in China, because even if extra tariffs are imposed, that China has a plan to continue stimulating growth regardless. Now, this China Development Forum is happening while we have a visit from a US Senator, Steve Daines. He is here over the weekend, and yesterday, on Saturday, he met with Chinese Vice Premier He Lifeng. He's expected to meet with Premier Li Qiang later today to discuss trade. Obviously, we have coming up in April this looming deadline from the Trump administration, potential additional tariffs for countries, reciprocal trade tariffs he's mentioned. So Daines himself used to work for Procter & Gamble. He has extensive China experience, but he's also a major supporter of Trump's America First policy. No doubt in his discussions, he'll be laying the groundwork for what he describes as constructive dialogue towards working out trade disagreements and potentially laying the groundwork for higher-level meetings between Chinese and US officials in future. Katrina Yu, Al Jazeera, Beijing.
Hundreds of people in southern South Korea have been told to evacuate due to the threat of a wildfire. The blaze, which began in Shangjong County on Friday, has already claimed the lives of 4 people, including 3 firefighters. South Korea's government has declared a state of emergency in several southeast regions and deployed more than 300 personnel to help fight the fire. Pakistan has warned that it will deport hundreds of thousands of Afghan citizens from April the 1st if they don't leave the country before that. The government has blamed Afghans, who make up the largest migrant community in Pakistan, for attacks and crimes. Kamal Haider reports.
This is what is left of Jalala refugee camp in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province. Once inhabited by tens of thousands of Afghans, it is now occupied by just 200 families. Many were born here and have died here, buried in a foreign land. We meet a local elder who says he came here with just the clothes on his back more than 40 years ago.
We have nothing to go back to. Afghanistan has been destroyed by 44 years of war. We have made a home here in Pakistan, so we will have to start from scratch. We will have to get used to living in tents again like we did when we first arrived here. In time, we hope we will be able to build a new home in Afghanistan.
Gul's eldest son takes us to his home. He has already packed his belongings and ready to move on short notice. People here are worried about their future. Sardar Afghan is worried about his children, and especially his 9-year-old daughter, studying in a local school. She does not want to go back to Afghanistan.
I don't want to go to Afghanistan because girls' education is banned over there. In Pakistan, we are getting education, but if we go back, what will happen to my education?
Pakistan has given Afghan nationals until the end of this month to leave the country or face deportation by April 1st. In the past, some Afghans here have faced accusations of involvement in crime and attacks. But right groups are urging the government to stop the forced expulsion of Afghans, citing violations of international law. It is Ramadan, a month of worship and contemplation that end with festivities as Muslims around the world celebrate Eid. But for almost 1 million Afghans living in Pakistan, it is a time of uncertainty and fear as they are forced to leave against their will. On the surface, this could be another day in life, but the future of these people remains a matter of concern.
Our main concern at the moment is if people who have international protection needs, in other words, might be at risk if they return to Afghanistan. So it's that. If people in those categories are forced to return, obviously it's an issue for us. We do, of course, understand that the government of Pakistan has hosted Afghan refugees for very many years, and from UNHCR's perspective, we appreciate that.
Badam Gul built this house brick by brick and hopes he can rebuild his war-ravaged country. He may seem to be a broken man, but he says his faith remains intact and unwavering. Kamal Haider, Al Jazeera, Jalala refugee camp in Pakistan.
OK, that's it from me, Aline Saeed, for now. Weather is next.
Being part of a bloc of these countries, and as things seem to be changing in the pecking order, in international pecking order, Sudan used to be at the bottom, but now it wishes to find another place.
OK, I think we've got about 30 seconds left. Very brief question to Alan then. Al-Fashir, is it the next hotspot to keep your eye on? Will it decide whether that this is simply a phase of consolidation or the beginning of the end for the RSF?
Yes, Al-Fashir. I think the really big thing to keep an eye on is what the external backers, though, do. Will the UAE pivot towards trying to repair its relations with Port Sudan and allow this war to de-escalate? Will Egypt and Saudi Arabia pressure the Sudanese army to use this as an opportunity towards pivoting towards peace as well? I think these external players in this war are the ones who, if we're going to see this war wrap up, will need to make some pivots.
All right, thanks so much to our guests for sharing their analysis, Dalia Abdelmunam, Alan Boswell and Al-Bashir Idris. And thank you too for watching. You can see the show again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. For further discussion, head over to...
The fire has broken out after the attack. Israel says it has launched a second wave of strikes targeting Hezbollah. It's also warned the Lebanese government that it bore responsibility for any attacks coming from Lebanese territory. Well, earlier, at least 2 people were killed and a dozen wounded after Israel launched a series of attacks on southern Lebanon. This is in response to 3 rockets fired towards northern Israel earlier on Saturday. Hezbollah has denied any involvement in those launches. Al Jazeera's Zaina Khoder reports from Beirut.
A serious escalation on the Lebanon-Israel border. The Israeli military launched a wave of airstrikes across southern Lebanon in response to cross-border rocket fire. Some caused deaths and injuries. Early on Saturday, rockets were launched from Lebanon towards the Israeli border town of Metullah, the second such attack since a ceasefire came into force in late November, but this time on a populated area.
Around 7:30 in the morning, we woke up to a number of incoming rockets. There were sirens, and then the Iron Dome system intercepted a number of rockets that were fired from Lebanon.
Israel is blaming Hezbollah. The group denies launching any rockets. Instead, it accuses Israel of violating the truce by carrying out hundreds of strikes in recent months and keeping its troops in hilltop positions within Lebanese territory. Hezbollah says it remains committed to the ceasefire and stands by the government. Some critics believe otherwise.
Hezbollah has been the most powerful actor in southern Lebanon for years. Any group that operates in the region is under its command. But it is about time that Hezbollah realize it needs to fully disarm, or else it will be a threat to Lebanon.
The Prime Minister is warning the renewed military activity risks dragging the country into another conflict. He's also called on the Defense Minister to take the necessary measures to make it clear that the state alone takes decisions on war or peace.
That statement appears to be directed at Hezbollah, which so far has refused to fully disarm. The new leadership in Lebanon has committed itself to extending the state's authority across the country. 24 hours before the rocket fire, Nawaf Salam said Hezbollah's weapons would no longer play a role.
Hezbollah has been weakened militarily and politically, but it still has supporters. And they oppose efforts by Israel and its ally, the United States, to start political discussions with Lebanon.
What happened today is the beginning of further Israeli attacks, because Israel wants to pressure Lebanon through force to create a political reality pushing Lebanon to normalize relations with Israel.
That's a divisive issue, and Hezbollah officials have warned such pressure might push the country into chaos and civil war. The already fragile ceasefire is facing its biggest test. Zaina Khoder, Al Jazeera, Beirut.
Let's connect with our correspondent in Lebanon, Zaina Khoder, over the phone.
A warning where 5 civilians have been reported injured in the strike, and the situation sounds very critical as echoes of explosions continue to shatter the silence of this night. As I'm talking to you right now, Darren, I can hear and see the Israeli drones hovering across the sky of the central area alongside with Israeli choppers that were hovering over Al-Aqsa Hospital. Later, they have launched an attack on Al-Baraj refugee camp. We have been closely monitoring the strike with a number of casualties reported in Al-Baraj refugee camp. So there has been a clear escalation that is taking place in Gaza following the Israeli unilateral attack on the territory, which has been quite clear that Israel is gradually escalating its military attacks on heavily built-up neighborhoods and areas that are densely populated with civilians and formally have been designated to be safe humanitarian zones. We can say for sure that at least 33 Palestinians have been killed since Saturday's dawn, where people are trying right now to navigate further safety options. They believe that Israel till now is relying on a very extensive military campaign in which they are attacking schools, hospitals, mosques, and also makeshift camps where people have started to take it as a refuge. Now, the sound of these drones are getting much more louder, where it has been seen as a clear source of anxiety and frustration for civilians who are absolutely trying to secure their families and children and in order to find some sense of safety. So the situation remains very volatile as we understand that Israel is practicing ultimate pressure on Gaza in order to be granted more political concessions on the table of negotiations. But we can also understand that there is no any direct ground confrontation so far with Hamas fighters and the Israeli occupation forces, despite the Israeli military incursions for specific areas in Gaza, including Rafah, Beit Hanun, and the partial recontrol over the corridor in the central areas of Gaza, Darren.
All right, Al Jazeera's Tariq Abu Azoum live for us there in Bir al-Bala in central Gaza. Tariq, thank you. Meanwhile, thousands of Israelis have taken to the streets of Tel Aviv to demand an end to the war on Gaza and a return to the ceasefire deal so that the remaining captives held in Gaza can return home. Family members of the captives and protesters are calling on the government to return to talks brokered by Egypt, Qatar and the US. Many accuse Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu of breaking the ceasefire and continuing the war for his own political survival. Al Jazeera's Hamda Salut has more from the Jordanian capital Amman, and she's there because the Israeli government and the Palestinian Authority have banned Al Jazeera from reporting inside Israel and the occupied West Bank.
Several thousand demonstrators taking to the streets in Israel on Saturday night to protest against the Israeli government, but they're protesting against a wide variety of things. This is the first protest since Israel broke the ceasefire deal earlier in the week, and it's been one of the largest demonstrations in months because of that reason, because of Israel's decision to abandon the ceasefire deal. Now, family members of Israeli captives say that the Israeli government should move forward with the deal because it's the only way to ensure the release of the remaining captives. But demonstrators are also protesting against Netanyahu's decision to fire the head of the Shin Bet, that's Israel's internal security agency, Ronen Bar, saying that he has the authority to do so. But people in Israel are not happy with this, saying that the Israeli prime minister is trying to dodge essentially an external inquiry into Israel's security failures on October the 7th. But nonetheless, you also have pressure now from the economic sector. Opposition lawmakers as well as the Israel Business Forum are threatening to shut the economy down if Netanyahu moves forward with firing the security chief. These demonstrators are saying that Netanyahu has failed Israel and has failed the captives and are calling on him to do things differently. Hamda Salhout, Al Jazeera, Amman.
Israel has launched a series of attacks on southern Lebanon, killing 7 people and injuring 40 others. It says the 2 waves of airstrikes on Tyre and Tallinn were targeting Hezbollah. Israel also told the Lebanese government that it bears responsibility for any attacks coming from its territory. Zaina Hodder reports from the capital, Beirut.
Of people. It blamed a lack of progress on talks to release hostages and extend the ceasefire between Israel and Hamas. President Trump is set to speak with Russia's Vladimir Putin later this morning. These talks will focus on an end to the war in Ukraine. Trump told reporters yesterday, quote, many elements of a final agreement have been agreed to, but much remains, end quote. But while President Trump strikes an optimistic tone, Ukraine's president is expressing skepticism about this. In his nightly video address just last night, Volodymyr Zelensky said, quote, it's clear to everyone in the world that it is Putin who continues to drag out this war. We've got team coverage of these top stories for you. Weijia Zhang joins us from the White House, but let's begin with Remy Inocencio, who's on the ground in Tel Aviv. Remy, give us the reaction in Israel to these new airstrikes the IDF is conducting over Gaza.
Errol, yes, good morning. Well, coming from the Israeli government, there is this sense of determination. There is a sense of resolve that these overnight barrages across the Gaza Strip, up and down the Strip, has the focus, has the goal to try to get all the hostages home. So there's this narrative. The word is unrelenting, really, in order to try to squeeze Hamas, to try to get these hostages home. We know that there are an estimated 24 hostages still believed to be alive, about 3 dozen hostages believed to be dead. But coming from the words of Israel's own government, for example, Defense Minister Israel Katz said last night during that airstrike, if Hamas does not release all of the kidnapped, the gates of hell will open in Gaza. Also, the Israeli ambassador to the United Nations, Danny Danon, he said that we will show no mercy on our enemies. He's saying that we should not expect this to stop until all of the hostages are home. But, you know, here I am at Hostages Square, and I have been talking to people getting together, trying to figure out why it's come to this. Some people said that they're tired, that they actually support these overnight airstrikes. Other people say that it's, in their words, one of the stupidest things that their government has done. So there's this array of emotions, array of anxiety and frustration. Some people wanting this to happen, other people saying that this would spell the end, spell the death of the hostages still alive in the Strip.
And there is an American among those hostages still being held. We know that President Trump said Gaza is uninhabitable. Now we have these overnight strikes. What's the latest you're hearing about the situation in Gaza this morning?
Sure. Well, if it is uninhabitable, and by many counts it is, it's become that much more uninhabitable after these dozens of air strikes. From our own CBS News team on the ground, they have been telling us reports of families, women, children up and down the Strip from Gaza City down through southern Khan Yunis, all the way down through Rafah on the Egyptian border. Stories of families shattered. We are seeing images coming out from the Strip of people being taken to hospitals and morgues, and just rooms piling up with the wounded and, of course, piling up with the dead. And these scenes we haven't seen since before mid-January, when the ceasefire actually went into place. And again, looking ahead, the threat here from Israel's government is that we expect to see more airstrikes and potentially, possibly, more wounding and death in the Strip.
And we were just seeing some of the footage there. Remy Inocencio, thank you. Let's cross now to the White House and join our Weijia Zhang. Weijia, how much of an advance warning did the U.S. get? And what does that tell us about the U.S. position in all of this?
Well, the White House says that they were consulted by Israel before these attacks happened. And then the White House issued a statement saying Hamas could have released hostages to extend the ceasefire, but instead chose refusal and war. In terms of exactly how much of a heads up they got, we don't know, but it is significant that the Israelis were consulting with the U.S. And the fact that the White House is now willing to say that openly, it just shows how much in lockstep they are as they move forward here. And even though President Trump was trying to make sure that the framework of the ceasefire agreement could be filled in and that it could ultimately carried out, he also left room. You might remember that he had some warnings for Hamas before, saying that all hell will break loose if they don't release the hostages.
And that if Hamas doesn't release hostages, then Israel will go back to fighting, and to fight at a different level of intensity against Hamas in order to persuade Hamas to actually hand over the hostages. That's one thing happening. Second thing is that during this unofficial ceasefire that has been going on for quite a while, Hamas has also prepared. They have recruited new combatants and trained them. They have scavenged explosives from the battlefield, and they have smuggled in weapons, assault rifles and other types of weapons, and they have been planning attacks against Israel. And last night's Israeli strikes were also a preemptive strike against Hamas military commanders and field. Palestinian civilians who didn't want to be in Gaza, who wanted to flee the dangerous environment, were prevented from doing so by Hamas and by the Egyptians. And I think that is a travesty. And I think that the Egyptian authorities should be held accountable for Palestinian blood, suffering, and killing. Now, what's different now? There's a different U.S. administration. that sees eye to eye with Israel in understanding the complex military challenge that is posed by Hamas, by the fact that Hamas relies on using human shields as their strategy, abusing civilians as their human shields, and abusing the civilian infrastructure, schools, mosques, UN centers, and many other places that Hamas has been using in order to hide away from the IDF. And the understanding in the US is that that is not okay, and the US isn't going to stop Israel from fighting against Hamas, and most importantly, defeating Hamas. Now, defeating Hamas is a good thing. It's a good thing for Israel, and it's a good thing for Palestinians. It's a good thing for the region, and the sooner Hamas will be defeated, the sooner Gaza can go back to rebuilding, and then we can start to pave a path towards a prosperous and safe and respectful future for Gazans. But as long as Hamas is in power, held in power by the Egyptians and by certain European countries that continue to contribute money, as long as that is the situation, then suffering and misery and death will be the future of Gaza.
And it's because Israel used over 100 airplanes to attack all throughout the Gaza Strip. And the reason that they're doing so is because there's been nobody that has stopped Israel. All that we've seen over the course of the past 15 months is a demand that Palestinians somehow negotiate with the Israelis. And there's been absolutely no guarantee that Israel's going to stop the bombing, that it's going to allow humanitarian aid, that it's going to rebuild Gaza, and that it's going to have Palestinians lead a normal life. And so we're seeing this because Israel knows that it can get away with it. And it knows that it can get away with it because it got away with it during the previous administration. And it's certainly going to get away with it under the Trump administration.
And Diana, what kind of a notice did the residents of Gaza receive before these attacks happened? Israel is claiming that the negotiations reached a dead end, but did they really negotiate at all?
No, they never negotiated at all. That was also another one of the problems. We had the first phase of the negotiations, which Israel both halted and as well was violating. And then it never entered into any earnest negotiations over the second phase. And that second phase was going to lead to Israeli withdrawal and, of course, reconstruction and so on. And so much so that the Israelis failed to send their negotiators most of the times. So it was clear that what Israel wanted was that it wanted to continue to resume the attacks on the Gaza Strip, that this pause was simply a pause in order to change the different U.S. administrations. And that's it. And once again, it goes back to this issue of whether it is that Israel can get away with committing these massive war crimes.
Tonight, authorities searching for the armed shooters in connection to a mass shooting that killed 3 and injured 15 at a local park overnight in Las Cruces, New Mexico. Video posted on Instagram shows the moment gunfire erupted, dozens of people seen running.
1143 Central, we have multiple gunshot victims. Multiple gunshot victims. 969 Central, start alerting area hospital.
The victims, as young as 16, rushed to area hospitals. Authorities say about 200 people gathered during an unsanctioned monthly car rally when an altercation between two groups escalated. Police describing a massive scene, saying they found about 50 to 60 handgun caliber casings across the park. The suspects on the run.
We will find each and every one of them, and we will hold them accountable.
Las Cruces Police Chief Jeremy Story says unsanctioned car shows have become an issue in the area.
That area has been troubled with crime. In spite of some of the efforts, we are still struggling with that, obviously.
Whit, police say at this point no one has been arrested or detained. This as investigators are looking into leads and even asking the public for help as they search for those suspects. Whit.
A frightening scene in New Mexico. Melissa Adon, thank you. Now to the dry and gusty conditions fueling wildfire dangers across the central U.S. and southeast. More than 25 million people in 10 states under red flag warnings tonight. That includes big cities like Raleigh, Atlanta, and Denver. North Carolina issuing a statewide bird ban. Here's ABC's Ike Ajachi.
Tonight, multiple areas across the country are under an elevated fire threat. Over 25 million people in 10 states remain under red flag warnings as warm, dry, and windy conditions continue to raise the possibility of wildfires. Those warnings stretching from New Mexico to South Carolina, covering major cities such as Raleigh, Charlotte, and Atlanta. The Denver metro area also under a red flag warning. In the southeast, the greatest risk across portions of North Carolina, where a statewide burn ban is in effect. Right now in Polk County, officials there say 3 separate wildfires are burning, mostly uncontained. In Miami-Dade, Florida, firefighters are making progress, battling a large brush fire that's already claimed 27,000 acres.
There's still going to be obviously smoke for, days or weeks to go.
A couple weeks ago, North and South Carolina were ravaged by 175 wildfires, and tonight, those same areas once again under threat. Whit?
Kajachi, thanks so much. Let's get right to meteorologist Danny Beckstrom from our New York station, WABC. And Danny, how long is this fire threat expected to last?
Whit, this current threat lasts through this evening, but the dry conditions continue through the weekend until much needed rain arrives with the next storm system crossing the country. Just look at the alerts. Red flag warnings in effect until 8 p.m. local time. Then our attention turns to rain, snow, and wind, moving from the Mountain West to the Midwest tonight into tomorrow morning. By Sunday night, a severe threat develops from East Texas to Western Tennessee with damaging wind gusts and large hail. Expect heavy rain in cities like Cincinnati and Chicago. Then that rain moves to the Northeast with a messy Monday morning commute for the I-95 corridor, so the next 48 hours stay very active. Whit?
Something to watch. Danny Beckstrom, we always appreciate it. Thank you. Tonight, we're learning new details in the death of legendary actor Gene Hackman. Newly released body camera video showing New Mexico sheriff's deputies arriving on the scene and discovering the bodies of the Oscar winner and his wife, and what they heard from witnesses and caretakers at the home. Here's ABC's Zoreen Shah.
Let's get into the vehicle. Tonight, new body camera video revealing the moments after actor Gene Hackman and his wife Betsy were found dead in their Santa Fe home last month. The family's workers shocked. Sheriff's deputies releasing this body camera video, including interviews with a witness and initial fears that the cause of death could have been carbon monoxide poisoning.
I would communicate with her pretty much on a weekly basis. 2.5 weeks ago, that stopped.
Officials later determined that carbon monoxide was not a factor. Instead, Hackman died from severe heart disease with Alzheimer's as a significant contributory factor, and Betsy died a week earlier of the rare hantavirus disease. Officials determining one of their dogs, who was in a crate, likely died of dehydration and starvation. Workers saying they had no idea about major health issues. Workers at the property overcome with the couple's passing.
Just a normal person, and all of a sudden to see that, both of them, bro. Sorry.
As for the inside footage, Hackman's estate wants to block that release, citing privacy. A judge will determine that later this month. Whit.
Zoreen Shah for us tonight. Thank you. Turning to politics now, in the White House taking aim at the U.S. legal system. President Trump directing his attorney general to take action against attorneys and law firms that engage in what he calls frivolous and unreasonable litigation against the federal government. ABC's senior White House correspondent Selena Wang reports from Washington.
Tonight, President Trump escalating his threats towards the U.S. legal system, directing Attorney General Pam Bondi to punish law firms engaging in frivolous, unreasonable, and vexatious litigation against the United States, vowing to use the full power of the Justice Department, including imposing sanctions and revoking security clearances. The White House memo saying lawyers and law firms that engage in actions that violate the laws of the United States or rules governing attorney conduct must be efficiently and effectively held accountable. The president also ordering his Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem to find immigration lawyers they accuse of coaching clients to file dishonest asylum claims to circumvent immigration policies. All of this apparently part of a broader campaign of retribution against lawyers and judges who've opposed Trump personally or politically. Trump retaliating against law firms that have worked on cases against him, revoking security clearances for lawyers at Paul Weiss, Perkins Coie, and Covington and Burling, rescinding his executive order targeting Paul Weiss this week only after Trump says the firm promised to abandon its diversity policies and give $40 million in free legal work for administration initiatives. This comes as Trump calls for the impeachment of U.S. District Judge James Boasberg, who ordered the administration to halt the deportation of hundreds of Venezuelans accused of being members of the Tren de Aragua gang. But the flights did not stop, sparking a tense standoff between the president and the courts. Trump taking to Fox News.
Many people have called for his impeachment, the impeachment of this judge. I don't know who the judge is, but he's radical left.
And when on Monday, the Trump administration is expected to be in the appeals court to try and get Judge Boasberg thrown off the case. They claim that he is biased. And tonight, a Trump administration official tells me that deportation flights continue nearly every day, with 21 migrants sent to Guantanamo Bay this week. Whit.
Selena Wang at the White House, thank you. Now to the immigration crackdown and Cornell grad student facing deportation. ICE officials telling that student, a pro-Palestinian activist, to surrender. This after he filed a lawsuit against the Trump administration. And the new details coming in tonight. Here's ABC's Alex Prochet.
Tonight, the Trump administration intensifying crackdowns and sparking fear at colleges and universities across the country. Cornell University graduate student Mamadou Tall, seen here on the social media platform X, is the latest pro-Palestinian protester to be allegedly targeted by Immigrations and Customs Enforcement. Court records show he was temporarily suspended twice last year for his part in student protest of Israel's war against Hamas in Gaza, but had since been allowed to continue his studies remotely. Tall, a citizen of the UK and Gambia, who was here on a student visa, filed a lawsuit last weekend challenging Trump's executive order aimed at deporting foreign nationals who participated in protests critical of Israel. On Wednesday, he posted to X that law enforcement from an unidentified agency had been parked outside his home. On Friday, his attorney says they received an email from the Justice Department asking the PhD student to turn himself into ICE. The Department of Education has launched investigations into 60 universities over claims of anti-Semitism and discrimination, including Columbia University in New York, where there are still protests over the arrest and detention of Mahmoud Khalil earlier this month. The Columbia University graduate was the leader of student protests on campus last year, and now apparently detained in Louisiana without any formal charges filed against him as he awaits a court appearance in April.
As for Tall, his attorneys say that they haven't been notified by the government as to whether he faces charges or deportation. A hearing is slated for Tuesday in Syracuse. Whit.
All right, Alex Prochet, thank you. And tune into This Week tomorrow morning. John Karl speaks with White House border czar Tom Homan on the continued court clashes over the Trump administration's deportation policies. We go overseas now in the exchange of missile attacks between Israel and Hezbollah, the first since a ceasefire was declared back in November. Let's bring in ABC's Matt Rivers reporting from Tel Aviv. And Matt, what more are you learning about this tonight?
This has been the most intense day that we have seen in months at the Israel-Lebanon border. Tonight, the IDF saying 6 projectiles fired from southern Lebanon, none doing damage here. Israel responding with massive airstrikes, killing 7 people, though an Israeli official says they don't yet know who exactly fired the projectiles. Lebanese militia group Hezbollah denying it was them. And remember, Hezbollah and Israel fought each other fiercely last year up until a U.S. brokered ceasefire went into place. Since then, it has largely held up. So, this is the question. Whether it is a quick blip or escalates into something bigger remains to be seen.
That is the concern across the region. Matt Rivers, thank you. We do turn now to the historic showdown in the NCAA tournament. 2 titans of college basketball, coaches John Calipari and Rick Pitino, squaring off with a Sweet 16 spot on the line. And tonight, the other tournament highlights in men's and women's basketball as March Madness kicks into high gear. Here's ABC's Phil Lipoff.
Tie between Calipari and Pitino.
Tonight, a historic showdown between 2 of the game's best. Rick Pitino and John Calipari facing off for a spot in the Sweet 16. The Big East champions, St. John's, battling to the end, but it was the Arkansas Razorbacks defense that pushed them over the top. This is the 5th time these 2 coaches have met in the tournament. Before the game, both sharing their respect for one another.
My hope is people look and say they both get their teams to play really hard.
Cox a three.
In that arena hours earlier, the Purdue Boilermakers taking on 12th seed McNeese, going up early, never looking back.